You know what annoys me? When people aren't specific about naming their games. Take a series like Doom. If somebody says Doom, they could mean any game out of the entire series, but what they usually mean is the last one they played or the only one they've ever played, and you have to guess which one it is. Even worse is when I say Doom, and somebody says, ooh, which one? Motherfucker, did you hear me say a number? If I say Doom, I mean fucking Doom. And don't fucking tell me that I say Doom 1 instead, because it's not fucking called Doom 1, it's called fucking Doom. I realise I'm just being a pernickety old curmudgeon, but it bothers me, like somehow I'm the one who's been unclear. But the one time even I can't get pissed off at this is when they have two games with the exact same name. Usually these are reboots, forcing you to add a year onto the end of it. For fear that you might misrepresent which game you're talking about, people stop talking to you and they spread rumours that you're secretly a Tory. Or is that just me? Anyway, this isn't just limited to reboots, but it has this kind of same thing going on, where you still have to be careful about mentioning something that only happens in one game, confusing everybody, and then you're straight back into Tory rumour territory again. But today's game sees this happen a lot, even on the Googles, because we're looking at Fable. Unlike its more famous counterpart, 1996's Fable is an adventure game set in an ancient fantasy world, but with an ironic comedic twist which didn't take itself too seriously. Your young male protagonist ventures off so that he might help bring balance to the land. Okay, I can see where people might get these two mixed up. In fairness, the games are otherwise unrelated. One is a 3D hack-and-slash RPG, and the other... well, you know what the show is called, have a guess. I'll be honest, when I saw this on eBay, I knew I had to get it, purely because it had a fancy box shaped like a book. Mine even came with 3D glasses. Okay, so I think the glasses were in there accidentally, along with a bunch of Starship Titanic stuff. Anyway, the box ties into the title, as does the main menu. Speaking of, I hope you soaked all of that in, because that's the last time you'll hear any music from this game. So to stop this review becoming unbearably dull, I'll be using my own music selections with a varying level of appropriateness. So the story is that hundreds of years ago, an ancient race came to improve civilization on this planet. A priest named Ishmael and his co-conspirators set off to do things. They get caught, somehow triggering a cataclysm which splits the planet into 4 distinct regions and turns the conspirators into monsters, forever doomed to guard an emerald in every region. Except that they say Ishmael's whereabouts are unknown, yet you slay 4 monsters over the course of the game. If you're completely lost, don't worry, your eyes will start to glaze over watching the intro or reading the manual. It took me about 5 attempts just to learn enough to write this paragraph. And the game begins proper with us meeting Quickie, tasked with killing the monsters and retrieving their magic emeralds, because this will save the village from... stuff. Okay, enough of the badly written plot. Right away you'll notice the lack of a persistent user interface, giving all the screen real estate to the backgrounds. Nothing wrong with that at all, it often helps immerse you in a game. But I feel they went a bit too far in maintaining this look. The result? Looking at your character opens up the inventory screen, which is fair enough since that's the default verb they show you anyway, you're basically just clicking it. But on the other hand, you use your character to access the options menu, which sounds as weird as it feels. Most games just have a button that shows a menu, there was no reason to change that. How the game deals with verbs has a twist of its own too. Most games like this have you select a verb, then pick an object or character to verb with that verb. But this does the opposite. You'll hover the cursor over something, at which point the cursor will present an action you can do. Right-click, and it'll cycle through the verbs you can perform. This works in some ways and doesn't in others. It works in the sense that you don't have to cycle through every verb. It's also designed in a way that means you quickly pick up on which verbs are going to be available on certain types of objects, and the interaction becomes very natural. You don't really have to think about it. As for a way it doesn't work, here's an example. I take this item from my inventory, and I go to give it to Mr. Thief here, so he'll let me pass into the forest. Doesn't work. That's weird. It's clearly described as being valuable, the thief wants something valuable to let you pass, so why isn't this working? I even resorted to looking it up, and sure enough, that's the item he's after. Turns out if you right-click one more time, the verb changes from use to give. I can't think of a single instance in the game where you would need to make this distinction. Folks, don't put more work into making something less user-friendly. The last quirky thing about this interface is a little picture-in-picture close-up you'll often see of whatever you're interacting with. That's not just there for show, you can interact with that separately from the main screen, and more than once it's essential for examining something more closely. And it's for those reasons and more that I thank Buggery I bought a copy with the manual. The game's sense of humour is definitely oddball, with no regard for time periods or the fourth wall.
Cowper is so rich that he has his own colour TV.
It makes me wonder about the lack of music even more. It's a nice way to build atmosphere, but it only works if the game takes itself at all seriously. And it does not.
A ghost has emerged from the cat, scaring the crap out of Quickthorpe.
It's not that these lines aren't funny, but it makes me wonder if they ever sat down and picked a tone to work with. And the final gameplay sin is one of the oldest cliches in the book. Killing the protagonist for the lols. Now, considering how often this happens, you'd think there would be a game over screen when you die. Or literally anything. I think half the reason Space Quest games killed you so often was the wry text that accompanied your embarrassingly posed corpse. But here it just kind of happens. You can move the mouse around impotently, but that's it. And sometimes it's obvious that you're irreparably fucked, but it never explicitly tells you that you're fucked, nor what you might do to unfuck yourself. And it turns out the only thing you can do is to hit escape and go back to the main menu. And then it gives you the option to save. Okay, it's about time I hit on a good point. The game flows quite well, and none of the puzzles feel completely illogical, although you might find yourself keeping a walkthrough open in the background. But best of all are the graphics. That high-res SVGA display renders a detailed, colourful and interesting world. I still think it's a shame that SVGA wasn't utilised before the 3D era took off, because I am seriously in love with this look. It not only holds up today, but it hits my nostalgic sweet spot at the same time. Of course, being an SVGA doesn't necessarily make it worth playing. Fuck off, you had your turn. Hell, at least the Orion conspiracy had the good grace not to keep freezing up, which Fable does, usually when changing screens. And this gets very annoying near the end when you have a maze-like cave to traverse. No, actually worse than that. If you click somewhere on the map, you'll stop at every location between you and your destination, even if there's no reason to do so. The manual says you can double-click to skip past those locations, but I couldn't get it to work even once. For the record, the freezing only happens on the DOS version. You do get a Windows 95 version on the disc, but it's a much bigger pain in the ass to get running compared to just using DOSBox. And so now we turn to the biggest failing the game has, the ending. The original ending got an incredibly negative reception, which I am about to spoil, so just in case you're sensitive to that kind of thing. It turns out Quickthorpe is a convicted murderer reading a story in jail, and the narrator was the prison warden. Considering the comedic, non-serious nature of the rest of the game, it does not surprise me that this "it was all a dream and you're actually a horrible person" ending was so despised. It's not a satisfying conclusion in the least. So the developers put together a happy ending for the later North American release. In this ending, Quickthorpe beats the bad guys, saves the world, I assume, they don't actually show that, and heads back to the village for smooches with his dearly befuddled. It's a marginally better ending, but not by much. Mind you, it kind of matches the other parts of the game that look rushed, namely the frequent freezing and subtitles not matching their spoken lines. Sometimes they don't even use the right voice.
Now that the shark is dead, you don't mind jumping in.
Overall, I think this game is just okay. It's only average in the sense that it excels in some areas and completely faceplants in others, with the two cancelling each other out. The main gripes that I have with it are a fairly short length, unsatisfying encounters with some of the earlier big bads, and the constant threat of freezing looming over your head. Seriously, I felt like I had to save every 3 screens like it was some kind of ritual for fending off the apocalypse. It's more curious than anything. It's something I'd never heard of that didn't turn out to be a great game, but it didn't make me regret having a look, despite the lack of an ending. But hell, I'll play Knights of the Old Republic 2 again, and that barely had an ending. It's worth a gander if you can find it cheap, but given the complexity of the package and the general rarity of it nowadays, you're not likely to find it for less than 20 quid. It may have been eclipsed by a much grander Fable, but pretty much deserved it.